What's up, guys? So if you're like me and you like dabbling with used PC parts, it's inevitable that at some point you're going to come into a modular power supply that is missing cables, or when you bought the system, the person you bought it off of didn't include cables with you, or whatever the situation may be. They do make custom cable kits for most power supplies, meaning you can just go online, Amazon, something like that, and you can just buy like a cable mod kit or something like that and get all your cables. So what are we looking at here? Basically, we have that exact situation. I bought this PC used. It did not come with a graphics card. This is an i7 8700K system. We've gone ahead and put in a 6600 XT in here, and you can tell by this red light, it wants something plugged in. So down here on our power supply, we have two 8-pin graphics card power ports where you would normally have the cables, but like I said, I didn't get those included. So what I'm going to show you today, hopefully, is a quick trick, thinking outside the box a little bit, and maybe just making you guys aware of some concepts that maybe you didn't realize were pretty readily available. And we're going to make a little cable that just goes from here to here. Doesn't need to run back with all these other cables and be cable managed. I'm perfectly fine with just a little short cable here in this particular case. So this cable is just another random cable I have laying around. This is actually a cable extension for CPU 8-pin power. And this is just one of those cables that you can buy off Amazon as an extension cable that basically this end plugs into your motherboard. And then this end, spoiler, it's already depinned. We're gonna get into that in a second. This end normally just has like a female connector so that your regular power supply cables coming from your power supply that aren't nice and custom and individually sleeved, these plug in behind your motherboard tray. This ugly cable and this connection hides behind the motherboard tray being cable managed away, and all you see is this nice braided cable, right? So we all are familiar with cable extensions now. That's basically how they work, and that's also why it's such a short cable, because it just needs to go from front where you see it just a little bit behind the motherboard tray. But what we can do with this, because this particular one is white and black and ties in quite nicely with the theme in here. See what I'm seeing here? We could do a little something with not too much effort and have a really nice custom cable. So let me show you some tools we're going to need to rework this cable and make it into a nice little custom GPU power cable. So the first and most important tool we're going to need is a multimeter. This is just a really inexpensive one from Amazon. If this is already looking at your wheelhouse, don't worry. This is not as difficult as it probably looks like it is. This one happens to have an amp clamp on it as well. We can ignore that part for now. We don't need it. All we need is a multimeter that will do volts DC, which looks like that symbol right there. And that is going to be for double, triple, quadruple checking that after we make some modifications to this cable, that we're not going to short anything out. Next up, we're going to need an actual D-pin tool. I will try to remember to leave links to places where we can find these. But this is just a tool, and it basically goes in here into the housing, and you push it down in a certain way basically, and you can release the pins. And that's how we took this housing connector off, and we still have all the pins attached there. So that's your D-pin tool. Now, because we're also going to have to be changing these male pins to female pins, we're going to be cutting these off actually, and we're going to have to basically restrip and rework the ends of this. So we will also need wire strippers, any kind of wire strippers really, and a pin crimping tool to crimp new pins on. And that also means, of course, we need some new pins to crimp on. Female pins in this case to replace the male pins. This EVGA Supernova power supply uses a bit of a odd connector on the modular cable side down here. So what I found was I had this spare cable laying around where this end plus this 2-pin end side by side, that will work just fine for our application. So the first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to actually just steal these connectors because I need them. So I'll show you how this D-pin tool works. So basically what we're going to do here is we're going to take this tool and we're going to go down each side of the pin, like so. Might be a little tight to get it in there. All right, just like that, down each side of the pin. And then we're going to fully seat the tool. You can kind of feel it almost. I just felt a little don't want to say a click, but there was a little bit of a physical feeling when the tool was fully seated. And then with the tool still fully seated in, we can pull the pin out. Now, what's going on is you see these little wing ears sticking out. Those are what actually catch on the housing. When the housing slides over, that's what actually catches on the housing and doesn't allow you to pull it back out. So all we're doing with this tool, when we slide it in, is we're pushing down those ears. Now remember, the housing will apply some sideways pressure on these pins. But hopefully you can see that. We're sliding the tool in and pushing those ears down, and that allows us to pull the pin out. So I'm just going to go ahead and depin the rest of these so we can have these bare connector housings. It's tricky, but have some patience and hopefully it all works out. So also another quick tip, which I'm just kind of remembering, I haven't done this in a little while. So after you get your tool properly down each side of the pin, what can actually help is if you take the cable you're trying to remove, and you actually push it into the housing further. You push it in this way, into the housing. And as you do that, push the tool. So you're pushing everything together, and then it slides out a lot easier sometimes. And what you're doing is you're really just jamming those wings down, pushing that cable forward, and hopefully that explanation makes sense. Okay, so we have our connector that can go into the power supply. We have our connector that can go into the GPU. I'll leave links again in the description. I don't know if I already said that. I guess I need to depin this end as well. Hold on. Okay, so now that everything is depinned in front of us here, we want to rebuild our black-white pattern into this connector so it looks nice and aesthetic. So basically all we're gonna do is, well, first we're gonna do a little trick before we reinstall these pins. So sometimes after pulling these pins out, you can see this ear is a little bit bent. That's an example of what a good one looks like. This one's a little pushed in and collapsed, so we're gonna pull this pin out and straighten it. So 1 second. So there we go. That's an example there of how it should look. See those little wings sticking out? That's going to allow you, when you slide the connector on, those little wings are going to clip into place and hold the pin from being able to pull out. So hopefully you guys can see that. I'm going to just flip this power supply off so there's no power in the system, because as you can tell right now there is. So we want to just start rebuilding our pattern now. And as I'm going through and doing this, again, I'm just seeing if any of those wings are kind of collapsed in, pushing them back out so they get a nice, I don't know if you'll be able to hear this, but it's actually it's clipped and locked in there. All right, so that right there was a super easy way to get a nice custom GPU cable. We're like almost there, right? Except for this is going to be a little bit more involved part, because now we have to convert these male pins to these female pins, and I'm probably going to get a little fussy, and I'm going to want to do these a nice custom length so they sit in here without having this extra bulge. So I don't want to do them like that. I want them to be more like that. And oh yeah, we can get fancy with cable combs too. If you have a 3D printer, it's actually super easy to make cable combs. So I'll probably run off a few of those and throw in a couple shots at the end, because I won't have those by the time I finish out the video today. You know what? With the magic of video editing, I probably will just overlay it over this part where I'm talking right now. Wouldn't that make more sense? Anyway, amateur video maker aside, yeah, let's go ahead and figure out where these wires need to land to send the correct voltage up to the graphics card, and make sure we're not sending power where they're supposed to be ground, or vice versa, and shorting anything out. So next step is to figure out how to connect everything. We've crudely gone ahead and drawn up the GPU plug. That's the 8-pin here, and the PSU or power supply plug down here. I have them drawn in the same orientation of how they appear to me in front of me. So the clips are at the top, clips at the top here, clips at the top here, clips at the top here. And this is going to basically show me that I have my wires coming out of here, where they're going to need to land down here. So the first thing we need to know is for each of these 8 wires, which are positive and which are negative, or which ones are power, which ones are ground. So all we do, we just Google a power connector real quick, and it's important that you make sure that the diagram you're looking at, you need to know if you're looking at the cable side or the device side. Most of them will show you from the cable side. So if I am looking at this, basically, I can tell that the 2 separate pins that come off on a GPU connector are always ground. So if we were to take this and plug it in this way, the 2 on this end would be negative. And then, again, I know this is probably really tiny, but basically I can see the connector is drawn on the top here. So I know all these top connections are also negative or ground. So I've put negatives across all those. And then my last few here, which is going to be these remaining 3, which if I'm looking at it this way, it's these bottom 3 pins here, right? Now when I turn and plug it into the GPU, that means it's these 3 pins. So positive, positive, positive. Now just to make this more clear, so I don't mess anything up, I'm going to put, I'm going to make these all into G's for ground, just so the symbols look a bit more different to me. Now all I have to do to make this cable work, because we can plug it in right now like this, that's not going to do us much good if these aren't connected to anything. So all we have to do now is figure out where to land these pins, which we're still going to have to cut off and replace, where we'd land these down into the power supply to make these voltages show up on the GPU side. Hopefully that makes sense. Maybe if I just go ahead and continue, hopefully it'll make sense as I go through it. So first thing we're gonna do is we're gonna unplug this GPU cable because we don't want any of these metal ends to touch. And we're gonna actually flip the system on, set our multimeter to DC volts, which is this symbol here. And the easiest thing to do is take your ground lead and put it on basically anything metal. I like to use basically the PCIe for the GPU back here. I know this is grounded, so I like to use this metal here. You could probably get away with using a power supply screw as well, as long as you get a spot that doesn't have any paint on it. So let's try using a power supply screw actually. So what we're gonna do now is we're gonna actually power the system on. I don't know, hopefully you can tell that system is on. And basically come down in here now and we're gonna figure out what each of these, perfect. We're gonna figure out what each of these pins down here is. So, okay, so I was editing this video and I realized that my big head got in the way. So what we're trying to do here is we have this connector down here and we don't know which of these pins in this connector do what. So I have a blank connector drawn up with the clip at the top, the same way it appears to us here. And we need to probe and figure out which each of these pins does. So take our ground, our black lead, go onto a good known ground, make sure that you're not in any paint or anything. And then I like to just take my positive probe and just probe around in here until you find some power. There we go, there's 12 volts there. And all that's telling us is that our probe, our black probe, is on a good ground. Because for example, if I wasn't on a good ground, like say this painted part of the case here, even though I know I'm on a power pin, you can see how we're not getting any voltage on that painted bit. So good ground, make sure you probe around, make sure you see that at least something is power so you know you're making a good connection. And now we can go through and we can just label these. So the far right lower pin, the one beside that, and the one beside that are all power in this case. So we're going to fill out our diagram. Far right lower pin, that's power. The one beside that is power, and the one beside that is power. Making sure we're on a good ground again. Yep, completing the circuit, there's 12 volts. Now we're gonna go along and make sure that the rest of these pins are ground. So basically 0 volts means you have no difference of voltage. It means both of your black and red leads are on ground in this case. So negative 0.002, that's basically nothing. So that's ground. Same thing there, that's ground. Same thing there, that's ground. Same thing there. Same thing there. So the rest of these are all ground. So we can go ahead and fill out our diagram. Ground, ground, ground. Sorry about the horrible writing. I'm doing this on a weird angle. But now we know which pins are power and which pins are ground on the power supply. And yeah, just like that. Hopefully that makes sense how we got to this point so far. You can always go back and rewind, I suppose, and hopefully I explain it clear enough that you can get it eventually. Sorry, I'm failing at articulating this clearly. But basically now, I go ahead and shut the system off, turn the power supply switch off so it's like off, off. And I now know I have a map. I can plug this in here. And I basically know that this top left pin up here, right, our top leftmost pin, this pin here on our GPU needs to go right here to a ground. Doesn't matter what ground, actually. It could go to this one, this one, this one, or this one. But for the sake of it, like, looking nice and tidy, and because this pinout happens to match this pinout, I can just put every wire. I can put this, you know, wire number 1 into slot number 1 here. I can put wire number 2 into slot number 2 here. And it can have a nice straight cable. So hopefully this makes a lot of sense. So we're gonna go ahead and wire this up. And then after we're done that, we're gonna double check everything because we don't wanna blow anything up. Of course, also, the next step is we gotta make these cables be about yay long. Now, there probably is some really advanced high-tech way of making these cables all exactly perfect. For me, I think I'm just gonna use some zip ties to kind of hold them roughly in the shape that they'll be when they're combed. And then I think I'm just gonna kind of eyeball it a little bit. I'm sure if I wanted to make this like really neat, I would probably have to land each of these wires individually one at a time. You know, maybe that's what I'll do actually. So I'm gonna go ahead and plug our empty housing into our power supply. And the first cable I wanna land down here is gonna be pin 1 into position 1 down here. So I just take it, I eyeball it 13 times. It needs to be cut about here. And I'm leaving a little bit extra because it just seems like a good thing to do. So you can see now when that's terminated and it goes in there, kind of how it will look. Now with that being said, I think that pins 2, 3, and 4 will go in something like that. So I'm just gonna go ahead and chop those now. And we'll go ahead and get ends put on those. Okay, so what I'm learning, having built custom cables in the past, is that dealing with the sleeving afterwards, like I'm trying to strip these wires now, it's way harder to do it this way. It's easier to make the cable from scratch is what I'm trying to say. In a way, in a sense. Because what happens is I put that mess in there, give her a strip, and it strips the insulator, but it does nothing for the actual sleeving around the wire. So basically, this is what we're going for here. This is one I've already done. So after we strip, we just need a little tiny bit of wire exposed, like this. And then we're gonna put a piece of heat shrink over that, just a small piece of heat shrink, like that. And then we're gonna actually melt this heat shrink a lot more than you usually would, because we wanna actually melt the fraying ends of the wire mesh. So maybe about 10 seconds or so with the flame pretty much right on it. Maybe not 10 seconds, that might be a little long. We're gonna let that fully cool down. We'll do the other ones. It's right about 7 seconds is probably about the right amount of time. Just want to be careful if you're doing this with white cables because the black soot from burning the heat shrink might stain your cables, so just be aware of that. And if you did it right, you should get a nice melted tip like that with just a little bit of wire exposed, and that's going to be perfect for a pin. So the reason why I didn't film cutting all these wires was because I don't know what I'm doing here, to be honest. I don't know if the lengths are going to match up or not. So don't take my advice on determining length. That's a skill I still have to learn. But what we need to go ahead now and do is put on our female pins. So we got some right here from AliExpress. Let's get 4 female pins. So we get our crimping tool. Depending on the style you have, mine you can preload the pins in. One click like that and it'll hold it for you. And then it makes it pretty easy to grab your wire and just feed it in there and push it through until it kind of bottoms out. And that gives you pretty much a perfect crimp. I don't know how well you can see that. So now in theory, you're done. Perfect crimp, never come off there, permanent. However, my crimper, I don't know if it's just my crimper, I've had mixed experiences with mine, so I like to just give them a bit of a tug. If I have a really tricky one where it seems to just not want to grab the wire for whatever reason, you can actually go in and put a tiny little dab of solder in there, but that usually shouldn't be necessary. This should be plenty sufficient. Excruciatingly, they're all done. Just checking, making sure they all made good connection. Okay. Essentially all we have to do now, connect 1 to 1. So basically 1 to 1. But we obviously need the connector, so that's right here. We put it in the top. Boom. And we just basically keep looking at our diagram. We know that 2, so that's the other half of the clip there. 2 is that pin. So we take 2. And it goes in just like that. 3 to 3. Just like that. 4 to 4. Etc., etc. And your finished product should look something like that. Now it's a really good idea at this point. Unplug this potentially dangerous death cable from your GPU. Go ahead and plug that into the power supply. And we're going to power the system on, and we're going to check this end of the cable against our wiring diagram, which is conveniently still pulled up here. And make sure now that all these voltages match what they're supposed to be in this picture here. So same thing as last time. I'm going to go on the power supply screw on the back. And the first thing we're going to check is this bottom left pin. We should have power, and we do. Next tube beside it also should have power. That one, yes. That one, yes. And now the rest of the pins on this connector. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. So the top ones and the 2 on the right. We shouldn't get a reading here at all because they should all be ground. But it's always a good idea to triple check. So ground, ground, ground. And just a note, guys, if you're seeing like negative 0.003, that's essentially 0. What we're checking for here is that we don't have any 12 volt where it's not supposed to be, because that's how things blow up. So we can go ahead and shut the system off one more time. We've now double checked this cable and we know it's okay to plug in. So we're going to go ahead and plug it in. and it's got some odd twist to it, but like I was saying before, don't really listen to me on how to measure cable lengths because I don't know what I'm doing. Okay, I've reconfigured the cable a little bit, and I think once I put some cable combs on here now, it's going to sit more how I thought it was going to sit. Right, so if you imagine my fingers are the imaginary cable combs, I think it'll work out. Moment of truth time. Let's see if this thing goes up in flames. There we go, we got a picture. So there we go, guys. Cable's working just fine. Overall, it went a little rougher than I hoped. I probably cut these just a tad short, but I'm gonna go print those cable combs I was talking to you guys about. Hopefully there was something useful you could take away from this video. I know someone had mentioned in one of my previous videos, they had asked what the point of the video was. There was no real point, so I wanted to make something a little more helpful. So if you got any value at all out of this, go ahead and hit that like button, and if you guys subscribe, you can expect more random PC videos. Hopefully they're unique and helpful, or at least entertaining. All right, I gotta go make some cable combs. Thanks for watching.